In this video, we're going to talk about how to write a compelling research problem. And the research problem can be something that eludes a lot of people within the research process because while we want the methodology of a dissertation to study 1 to 2 variables, meaning very narrow, very specific, the reason that we do the research is actually much more complex and zoomed out. So when I'm conducting research, I'm not specifically looking to see, does the PSAT predict the SAT? That's not the problem that I'm trying to solve. The problem that I'm trying to solve is something like students are performing low on the SAT, so I'm trying to start interventions earlier on in the high school process by looking at PSAT scores. And if PSAT scores are a good predictor of SAT, then this is something that I'm going to design research around. But again, my problem is not predicting SAT scores from PSAT. My problem has to be a larger societal, policy, disciplinary, has to be a larger problem. It has to be the so what. So I'm studying this and my first response to you is going to be, well, so what? Like, why are you studying it? So we want to think big picture here. And so what I've done is I've crafted some strategies and some guiding questions to really help you dig into so what. And so the first process is that you have to think practicality. So you have to be able to explain the practical and real-world consequences of the problem. So what are the negative outcomes if I don't address this problem down the road? And I mean 5 years, 10 years, 25 years down the road, what's going to happen if we don't fix this? Who is this going to affect? Not just in the short term, but in the long term, who is it going to impact? And then how does it impact their daily life at any stage of life, whether they're 40, whether they're 60, how is it impacting their day-to-day life, their work environment, or a social system as a whole? And so this can be kind of challenging and overwhelming to think about. So what I've done is I've taken some kind of practical real-world consequences of the problem here, and I've tried to line them out. So we've already thought about, here are the 3 questions that we're going to work to answer, and here are some possible consequences just to get your brain moving. And so think about, is it going to decrease someone's productivity, and is it going to have an economic impact on people? So if we don't address this problem, could it lead to something like a decrease in productivity? So if we don't teach people how to use AI, then as jobs move forward and use AI, people are not going to be as productive, which means that they're going to be unemployed. And ultimately, it's going to have a major economic impact on those individuals and limit them. Then we have, is it going to widen socioeconomic disparities? So is it going to disproportionately impact a marginalized community? Is it going to exacerbate an existing inequality that's already there? Or is it going to limit access to opportunities? Even as simple as, if I don't know how to use AI in 15 years, I'm not going to be able to find a job because they're all going to require some level of proficiency with it. Or does it perpetuate social and economic issues any further? Does it lead to a reduced quality of life and well-being? So if we leave this unaddressed, is it going to negatively impact the the overall quality of the life, mental health, and well-being of those people that we are trying specifically to study? And are there going to be far-reaching impacts within the community? So if I have an entire community that doesn't have educational opportunities, that's going to lead to long-term disparities, continual marginalization, all of those types of things. So we're thinking down the road, long-term impacts. Then we need to take that and tie it to a societal issue. So to find that societal issue and kind of put your finger on it, It's how does this problem contribute to a larger challenge like inequity, economic disparity, or public health? So I'm trying to create buckets here. So does what you did in step 1 impact public health? Does it impact economics? Does it impact inequity? What bucket does it belong in? And then can you link this problem to something that's going on in the world today? So am I looking at policy, current events, public debates? And so, like, again, the AI example is being very publicly debated right now. And so I can tie it to current events. And I can say that I want to research this because I want to know about it. And I want us to make informed decisions at the end of the day. The societal impact of the problem is kind of sometimes going to have overlap, but you need to figure out the bucket that it best fits in. And it may not be one of these 3 buckets. This is just kind of an example, because a lot of you are going to tell me, well, but that's complicated. My thing, it falls into multiple categories. And the answer is yes. It's kind of like this Venn diagram. But which one is the best fit? So that's what I need you to really sit with, is which one of these areas is going to be the best fit for you. Then we're going to directly connect it to policy and decision making. So in step 2, you may have said that there's a policy issue happening here, and that would kind of blur your step 3. So you would kind of advance to 4. But if we're in 3 and we did not articulate policy as our bucket that we're putting it in, then I want you to think about, how does this issue relate to government policies, district policies, state policies, Department of Education policies, school policies, or other institutional practices? What changes in policy or intervention could be informed by your research? So what could your research tell us that would then allow us to backfeed through that problem thought process you're going through right now? And how could we change things? What could be the long-term effect of understanding your problem and actioning it? And so it might be that we see government policy changes, district policy changes, state policy changes. That's going to happen if it's really around health, social services, or resource allocation, Title I funding, those types of things. Intervention strategies, any research that can inform development of new intervention strategies or programs, or dig into the root cause of something and provide more effective support for the affected communities. Or it could even just be institutional practices. Will this become a best practice that, if practiced, could have all of these ripple effects to everything that we've been talking about in steps 1 through 3? Then step 4 is where we say, okay, we understand the problem, we know the ripple effect it's going to have, I know the bucket it's going to fit in, and I know how my problem will affect policy either at the institution level or all the way up to the government level. Then we have to say, why am I studying this and where is the gap? And so you need to highlight the gap between the research and the action. So maybe have solutions been proposed, but they haven't been effectively implemented. That's really key. So is there existing research out there that's been done, and yet we still have this problem? That's a good question to ask. Is there a disconnect between the findings and how they're applied in practice? Is that what you're looking to fix, is a disconnect? Was it studied in a way that wasn't ideal? Did they do quantitative when someone really should have done qualitative? Did they look at it holistically? Did they interview versus focus groups? Did they use a different variable or data set and not get to the specific thing that you're trying to get to? So remember, this doesn't mean there is no research. It just means, what is the gap with how you would study this differently to change and fix the problem? This is your so what. And so think about all of these buckets. Disconnect between what someone else has found and no one else is implementing it. Maybe their sample size was too low, and so you're looking at a larger sample size. Maybe they looked at one specific region of the U.S. and didn't look at urban communities. Maybe the proposed solutions have been partially implemented, but not fully implemented. And so you want to do research and say, well, it's partially done here. What does that impact have on what I'm studying? Maybe there's a lack of collaboration or coordination between departments, especially like when we think about systems thinking in a school ecosystem or even an organizational ecosystem. There are lots of stakeholders that have to get on board with policies and programs. Maybe that's just not happening. Were there implementation challenges? Can we narrow the gap between the research and policy and seeing the outcomes? Do we need to maybe have a study now because the last study was 3 years ago and that's a lifetime? Do we need to look for evidence-based action? So there's this policy, it's not really being implemented. I'm going to implement it fully and I'm going to study what I found. And then step 5, again, I talk a lot about we have to tie the theoretical and conceptual implications to everything in the dissertation. So does addressing this problem refine an existing theory? So for instance, in my article that I published, The Learning Journey, I am essentially synthesizing and refining our current day understanding of Bloom's taxonomy as it relates to asynchronous courses. I'm looking at constructivism, I'm looking at Vygotsky, and I'm saying a lot has changed since these theories came out. We need to reframe, relook, and refine how we apply these theories within education. Or could the findings actually create something entirely new? Maybe it's related to the theory, but it could inform a new practice, a new policy, a new procedure. Maybe that's what could be there. And so what you would find is, does this challenge an existing theory? Does it refine our understanding? Does it contribute to something new, which that is going to be less dissertation and more postdoc? Does it expand the theoretical boundaries? So for me, Bloom's has not really been written about a lot from an asynchronous online perspective, especially with automation and grading and feedback. So there was a theoretical boundary that I pushed out and said, yes, these things are happening. No, he did not write about it originally, but the theory still fits. It just has to expand the boundaries. And then highlight the limitations. What are the limitations with what we're studying and the theory that you have? So Bloom's does not talk about auto-graded stuff, automated feedback. That is a limitation of Bloom's that we have to account for. And so Creswell talks about this deficiencies model where you're going to take all of these 5 steps and we are going to take all of those answers and all of that thinking and put it into this formula that's going to generate our research problem statement and the rest of that paragraph. So first we're going to state our problem clearly in 1 sentence. So this is my X challenge. You only get 1 sentence. And in that 1 sentence, you have to take all of your responses to those earlier questions, synthesize them and boil them down to the core issue. Now, you have to prioritize your words here. So you get paragraphs to talk about this, but the actual research problem is 1 sentence. I need to be able to say that 1 sentence and know what you're looking at. I need you to boil it down to the simplest possible terms, which means it needs to be concise, it needs to be specific, and you need to make sure that it's researchable. So many English language learners remain in language development programs for extended periods, limiting their access to core academic instruction and post-secondary opportunities. That's my research problem. Then I'm going to expand on it and talk about the policy and the inequity and the opportunity gaps and all these other things. But at the heart, this is what's going on in my research. Then I'm going to bring in some literature because, again, you are supporting your research problem with the literature. It's not that you can't think on your own or have your own ideas, but it's more that you are going to have to cite and support what you're saying. Then you're going to identify what is the deficiency. Are they not studying it the way that you would study it? Would you look at a different sample size? Would you look at different people? What are the things that you would change? What is unresolved? Was it not fully implemented? So because you've looked at this research, where is it deficient? Where is it lacking for what you're trying to study? Then you're going to take, again, we're just building off of those questions. So what are the practical and societal implications? So we're going to take those answers and we're going to put them together. So something like, without addressing these things, students may have lower academic success, restricted college access, and reduced economic mobility. And there is your so what. In 50 years, they are going to have less economic mobility if they do not implement this now. So this is the perfect example of the zoomed out statements that we're looking for. Notice this is not in step 1. Step 1 is just at its heart, at its core. Here in step 4, you're going to have a whole passage about these implications that happen in the long term. And then we need to know the importance. How are you contributing to the community and society within this? How are you affecting things? And so is it going to inform policymakers? Is it going to help educators with better practice? Is it going to support advocacy groups? So you have to know that your research is important and you have to articulate that importance and really sit with this. You need to be very intentional with your words and really think, why is this important? Not to you personally, not to your job, but why is it important to do the work? And that's how you're going to tackle your research problem. We're going to take a look at some tangible examples in class together, where we're going to walk through some scenarios, answer the questions, and kind of see how this plays out. But I hope that this video kind of gets you thinking about what are the questions I need to be thinking about in the meantime, and understanding that the problem is zoomed out.